Jock, one man, two faces, on one side, a respected businessman, and on the other, a terrifying killer. John Wayne Gacy, known to the world as the cheerful Pogo the Clown, was, in reality, a monster hiding in plain sight. It all began in 1978 with the disappearance of a young boy, leading to a horrifying discovery. One body, then another, until the shocking truth was finally uncovered. How could a man who seemed so normal be capable of such unspeakable crimes? This is not just the story of a serial killer. It is the tale of a predator who wore a mask of innocence. This is the horrifying truth behind The Killer Clown, a story that will haunt you forever. The man behind the mask, John Wayne Gacy, was a man who wore many masks. To the public, he was a friendly and well-liked businessman. He owned a construction company, which was doing well in the community. People saw him as an average man, but with a larger-than-life personality. He was known for hosting parties and participating in local politics, even running a successful campaign for a local Democratic Party position. To children, Gacy was Pogo the Clown, a character he would often dress up as to entertain at birthday parties and community events. His clown performances made him a beloved figure in the neighborhood. His friendly smile and outgoing nature made it hard for anyone to suspect the dark side of his personality. But Gacy's life was far from what it appeared. Beneath the friendly facade was a man hiding a monstrous secret. He had a history of committing violent acts and was a convicted sex offender, though his past was buried and largely ignored by the people around him. Gacy was a master manipulator who used his public persona to deceive everyone. As the years passed, the mask of normality would soon crack, revealing a shocking truth about the man behind the mask. A chilling discovery. The case of missing teenager Robert Peast set off a chain of events that would reveal Gacy's horrifying crimes. Robert had disappeared in December 1978 after leaving his workplace to meet with a contractor about a potential job. His mother immediately became concerned and contacted the police. Gacy had been the last person seen with Robert, and soon the police began investigating his connection to the disappearance. The officers learned that Gacy had made promises of a job to Robert, which gave them more reason to suspect foul play. When the police searched Gacy's home, they initially found nothing of real significance. But as they continued their investigation, something disturbing caught their attention. A strong, foul odor coming from the crawl space under his house. At first, the investigators had no idea what the smell was, but their curiosity grew. The search continued, and soon it became clear that they were on the verge of uncovering something far worse than anyone could have imagined. Gacy's home, a place that seemed so normal from the outside, was about to become the scene of one of the most terrifying discoveries in criminal history. The investigation begins. As the investigation into Robert Peast's disappearance deepened, the police began connecting Gacy to several other missing young men. Through interviews and a thorough review of Gacy's past, they discovered that he had a long history of sexual offenses. In the 1960s, Gacy had been convicted of sodomy and served time in prison, though he was released after just 18 months. Despite his past, he had managed to reintegrate into society, becoming a successful businessman and respected member of his community. This history of criminal behavior gave the police reason to believe that Gacy might have been involved in other disappearances over the years. The investigation expanded as the police learned about the young men who had gone missing in the area. Many of these victims had connections to Gacy. The police began to piece together a chilling pattern. They also discovered that Gacy had been known for offering young men work, a common tactic he used to lure his victims to his home. In the following days, the investigation intensified, and the authorities were determined to find concrete evidence to prove that Gacy was responsible for the disappearances. The horrible truth. When the police returned to Gacy's house in December 1978 with a search warrant, they uncovered a gruesome reality. In the crawl space beneath his home, they found the bodies of young men and boys. The remains were in various states of decomposition, but it was clear that Gacy had been killing for a long time. The police discovered at least 29 victims buried beneath the floorboards of his home. Some of the bodies had been buried in shallow graves, while others had been discarded in nearby rivers. This discovery would be only the beginning. The police began to search Gacy's property more thoroughly, uncovering even more bodies hidden in the house and the surrounding area. Gacy's crimes were horrifying, not only because of the sheer number of victims, but also because of the brutality of his methods. Many of the victims had been strangled or asphyxiated with ropes, cords, or other objects. Gacy had taken meticulous care in hiding his victims. He had lured them to his home by offering them jobs or money, and once they were inside, he would overpower them. His charming and friendly demeanor made it all the more disturbing when the truth came to light. Gacy's home was no longer a symbol of comfort or safety. It was a crime scene filled with the bones of his victims. The clown's true face. The discovery of the bodies shocked the public and exposed the true nature of John Wayne Gacy. People who had known him for years, including neighbors and family members, couldn't believe what they were hearing. How could the man who had entertained children as Pogo the Clown be capable of such horrors? Gacy had managed to deceive everyone around him. He was known for his participation in local politics and his public persona as a kind and friendly businessman. In fact, many people in the community had admired Gacy, believing him to be a model citizen. But behind the mask, he was a cold-blooded killer. Gacy had been able to use his position in society to gain access to vulnerable young men. His clown persona had helped him lure children into a false sense of security. He could easily convince parents that he was trustworthy and harmless. But once he had his victims alone, he would manipulate them into trusting him before he turned violent. For years, Gacy had hidden behind this mask of normalcy, and it took a long time for the public to fully grasp the enormity of the crimes he had committed. His true face was that of a man capable of unimaginable evil. A pattern of lies. As the police continued their investigation, they found that Gacy's killings followed a pattern. His victims were almost always young men and boys, often runaways or those looking for work. Gacy would approach them, offering a job, a place to stay, or money. Once they were in his house, he would tie them up and overpower them. The victims were then tortured, sexually assaulted, and ultimately killed. The method of murder was often strangulation, either with a rope or a piece of cloth. Gacy would sometimes use other methods to kill his victims, including suffocation or asphyxiation. He often kept his victims for several days before killing them, and he would sometimes take photos of them during their captivity. The evidence showed that Gacy had a cold, methodical approach to his murders. His victims were not random. They were carefully chosen, and the killings seemed to have a twisted sense of routine. Gacy's ability to blend into society made his actions even more disturbing. He had used his charm and authority to manipulate young men into his home, where they would meet a tragic and violent end. The arrest. In December 1978, Gacy was finally arrested. The police had gathered enough evidence to charge him with the murder of Robert Paeste, as well as the disappearances of other young men. During their search of Gacy's home, They found incriminating evidence, including bloodstains, ropes, and personal items belonging to the victims. Gacy was taken into custody, and during questioning, he denied any involvement in the murders. He remained calm and insisted that he was innocent, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. As the police continued to search for more bodies, they uncovered even more remains. Gacy's arrest was a relief to the families of the victims, who had spent years in agony wondering what had happened to their loved ones. For Gacy, however, the arrest was just the beginning of a long legal process that would ultimately result in his conviction. Despite his insistence on his innocence, the mounting evidence made it clear that he was guilty of horrific crimes. The trial, John Wayne Gacy's trial, began in 1980. His defense team argued that he was insane and not responsible for his actions. They tried to convince the jury that Gacy had a history of mental illness and that he had been driven by some kind of psychiatric disorder. However, the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that Gacy was not insane, but rather a cold, calculated killer who had planned his murders carefully. The prosecution pointed out that Gacy had lived a double life, maintaining a facade of normalcy while secretly killing and disposing of his victims. They presented evidence that showed Gacy had taken great care to cover his tracks, including burying the bodies under his house and throwing others into rivers. The trial was a long and harrowing process, with the details of Gacy's crimes revealed to the public in shocking detail. In the end, the jury convicted Gacy of 33 murders, and he was sentenced to death. Life on death row. After his conviction, Gacy was placed on death row at Menard Correctional Center. For the next 14 years, he awaited his execution. During this time, Gacy gave several interviews to the media, trying to explain his actions. He claimed that he had been possessed by demons or that he had acted in a fit of insanity. However, most people saw through his attempts to gain sympathy. Gacy's behavior in prison was often bizarre. He continued to paint disturbing artwork, and he even made self-portraits while incarcerated. He also wrote letters to various individuals, attempting to justify his actions. But despite his attempts to garner attention, Gacy's fate was sealed. The families of his victims were left with the pain of their loss, knowing that Gacy would never be able to hurt anyone again. Still, for many, his years on death row only served as a reminder of the pain and suffering he had caused. The final moment, on May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. After 14 years on death row, his life came to an end. His execution was a quiet and uneventful affair, with Gacy remaining calm in the moments leading up to his death. The public had mixed feelings about his execution. Some felt that it was long overdue, while others believed it didn't bring true justice to the families of his victims. Gacy's execution did not bring closure to the pain and trauma he had caused, but it did mark the end of his reign of terror. His death did not erase the memories of the 33 young men and boys whose lives he had stolen. Gacy's legacy would forever be one of horror, and his name would be remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in history.